My husband destroyed our marriage long before I ever picked up that microphone. For 10 years, Owen made me feel like a useful part of his life, but never like a woman he still desired. So at our anniversary party, after several glasses of wine, I sang the love song that belonged to my ex and told every guest that Luca was the man I should have married. Then I pointed at my husband and called him a worthless replacement who had wasted the best years of my life. Owen only tapped his wedding ring twice against his glass and looked toward the sound booth, too weak to defend himself as usual. I kept singing because, for once, I wanted him to sit quietly and hear exactly how badly he had failed me. My name is Harriet Vale. I am 44, and I direct donor relations for a community arts foundation. So of course I understand the difference between real passion and polite duty. Owen gave me a safe house, paid every bill on time, and slowly stopped making me feel like the woman he had chosen. At our anniversary celebration, I planned to sing the song that once belonged to Luca, the only man who had ever made me feel unforgettable. The practical one would sit among our guests and finally hear what 10 years of emotional silence had done to me. He would probably tap his wedding ring twice against his glass, the nervous habit he used whenever he was too weak to answer. By the end of my song, everyone would know that Owen had always been the replacement. Our marriage had not started cold. During our first years together, Sunday evenings belonged to music. We lived in a narrow apartment above a bakery, and the smell of warm bread rose through the floor before sunset. Owen would move the dining chairs aside, connect a silver microphone to his old laptop, and record me singing jazz songs near the window. He was patient with cables and sound levels. If a passing bus shook the glass, he waited and started the recording again. Afterward, we shared cheap wine and listened to my voice through one pair of headphones. Owen always watched my face instead of the screen. Back then, I believed he could see something special in me. When I failed an important audition, that changed. I came home expecting him to tell me the judges were blind. Instead, the practical one opened my rejection email, studied the comments, and suggested another vocal coach. He said my lower range needed more control and offered to help me prepare for the next application. He believed he was supporting me. I heard that I had not been good enough. 2 weeks later, Owen used part of his savings to build a small recording space in our spare room. He installed sound panels and repaired the floor himself. It was useful, thoughtful, completely wrong. I had needed him to say I was extraordinary. He gave me equipment. Years passed, and that pattern became our marriage. When I complained that we never went anywhere, Owen showed me our savings plan. When I said he no longer looked at me, he said he had been tired from work. On our 9th anniversary, he replaced the broken heating system and called it our gift to each other. Of course, the house was warm that winter. I was not. At the foundation, I created the kind of emotional moments Owen no longer understood. I arranged private concerts for donors, filled theatre balconies with candlelight, and helped nervous men plan proposals that brought entire rooms to tears. People trusted me because I knew when music should begin and when silence had lasted long enough. At home, silence always lasted too long. One evening, I stood in our music room with the silver microphone in my hand. Owen was checking a cable near the desk while I practiced the old song Luca and I had loved in college. It was simple and dramatic, built around a woman telling a man that no one else could replace him. Owen asked why I had returned to that song. I told him it reminded me of the last time someone had loved me with passion instead of responsibility. He paused with one hand on the cable. Then he asked whether I meant Luca. I said Luca had understood that women needed more than repaired appliances and scheduled payments. The practical one looked toward the microphone, not at me. That was typical. Objects were easier for him. He asked what the song was called. The question surprised me because Owen usually stopped listening whenever I mentioned my former boyfriend. I gave him the title and added that Luca still performed it at some of his concerts. Owen tapped his wedding ring twice against the desk. 1 tap, 2. Then he asked whether Luca sang the original version or the arrangement we had used in college. I smiled because the jealousy had finally reached him. After years of pretending Luca did not matter, Owen wanted details. I told him Luca remembered every arrangement because music had never been a household task to him. Owen said nothing after that. He adjusted the microphone stand, checked the level, and left me alone. The following morning he asked what had changed between us. His voice was soft, almost careful. That made the question sound smaller than it was. I told him nothing had changed suddenly. 1 missed anniversary, 2 cancelled dinners, 3 years without hearing him call me beautiful unless I asked first. The distance had been built slowly, and Owen had placed every piece himself. He said he thought providing stability showed that he loved me. I told him stability was what people offered employees and elderly relatives. A wife needed desire. His mouth tightened. He asked whether Luca had recently contacted me. I answered that Luca did not need to contact me for me to remember the difference between them. That was not a lie. Not yet. Owen tapped his ring twice against his coffee cup and looked toward the doorway. I read the movement as surrender. He had no defense because my accusation was true. That afternoon, Mara visited my office while I was finalizing the guest list for our 10th anniversary celebration. She saw Luca's name on a benefit concert proposal and asked whether he was the same singer I had dated in college. I told her he was. Mara leaned closer and said inviting him to perform would make the anniversary unforgettable. At first, I laughed. Then I looked at the theatre programme, the open-closing slot, and the silver microphone reserved for the final performance. Our anniversary needed honesty, and I already knew which song would deliver it. Luca returned to the city 3 weeks before our anniversary. The foundation had invited him to perform at a benefit concert because his name still attracted donors who enjoyed pretending they discovered artists before everyone else. I volunteered to manage his appearance before anyone else could claim it. That was part of my job, and of course there was no reason to make it sound personal. Mara knew better. She came into my office while I was reviewing the performance schedule and asked whether I had already told Owen. I said the practical one did not need a report every time I spoke to a musician. Mara smiled and reminded me that Luca had not been just another musician. She still remembered us from college when Luca would pull me onto small stages and introduce me as the only woman whose voice could make him forget his own. Owen had never said anything like that. He once told a donor that I was excellent at managing difficult schedules. That was his idea of admiration. Luca suggested meeting at a wine bar near the theatre to discuss the concert. The place had narrow tables and low yellow lights that made everyone look younger. He arrived 11 minutes late, wearing a dark jacket and the same easy smile I remembered. He apologized and said his manager had kept him on a call. I expected the years between us to feel heavy, but Luca treated them like an inconvenient pause. He remembered which wine I used to order. He asked whether I still sang. When I told him the silver microphone remained in our music room, mostly unused, he said some people stopped singing because nobody around them knew how to listen. That sentence reached the exact place Owen had ignored. I told Luca my husband cared more about equipment than emotion. Luca asked whether Owen understood what it meant to live with a woman who needed passion. I said Owen understood heating systems and tax deadlines. Luca laughed softly, then looked at his phone when it lit up. 1 message, 2, 3. He turned the screen over without answering. I took that as proof that our conversation mattered more. We discussed the benefit concert for 20 minutes. After that, Luca asked about my marriage. I told him Owen had made me feel safe but never unforgettable. Luca said safety could become another kind of prison when a person used it to avoid desire. I carried those words home with me. Owen was in the music room checking the old recording equipment. He asked why I smelled like the wine bar near the theatre when the foundation meeting had been scheduled in my office. His voice was calm, but the question was specific. I told him the location had changed after work. That was my first deliberate lie, and it sounded cleaner than I expected. Owen asked whether Luca had been there. I said several people had attended. He waited. The practical one always believed silence could force other people to fill it. I refused. Owen tapped his wedding ring twice against the edge of the desk and asked why I had not mentioned Luca's return. I told him I had not hidden anything because there was nothing important to hide. Then I reminded him that jealousy looked strange on a husband who had spent years acting as if his wife required no attention. He said the question was not about jealousy. It was about the fact that I had lied over something simple. I accused him of creating suspicion to avoid examining his own failures. The conversation ended there, but the room changed. Owen switched off the recording equipment and left without repairing the loose microphone cable he had planned to fix. The next afternoon, Mara brought coffee to my office and asked for every detail. She said reconnecting with Luca might remind me who I had been before marriage turned me into the woman responsible for everyone else's comfort. I told her I was not planning an affair. I only wanted to feel visible again. Mara said no one could blame a woman for remembering the person who once saw her clearly. A junior coordinator named Elise stood near the printer while Mara spoke. Elise heard enough to understand that Luca and I shared a past, but she kept her eyes on the paper tray. Her contract review was approaching, and I controlled part of her evaluation. Silence was safer for her. Luca's messages began arriving that evening. At first, they concerned rehearsal times and equipment requests. Then he asked whether I still remembered the old song. I answered within a minute. He waited almost an hour before replying that some songs stayed with people longer than relationships did. I read the message 5 times and decided the delay meant he had chosen his words carefully. The next morning, Owen was studying the theatre schedule at breakfast. He mentioned that Luca's current manager, Celeste Marin, had left an open weekend between 2 tour dates. He also knew Luca would be in the city through our anniversary. I asked why he had researched my ex so closely. Owen said Luca's manager and tour dates were listed in the technical materials sent to the theatre team. He had been reviewing sound requirements because the historic building still needed equipment adjustments. The explanation made sense, but I preferred the jealous version. It meant Owen finally understood that another man could still reach me. He tapped his ring twice against his coffee cup and asked whether I planned to add Luca to our anniversary program. I said I had not decided. That was my second lie. Luca's name was already in the closing slot. At rehearsal, I watched him sing from the center aisle while Owen worked inside the sound booth above us. Luca stopped after the first verse and asked whether the microphone could be warmer. Owen adjusted the level without complaint. Mara leaned toward me and said there was something satisfying about watching my husband prepare the stage for the man I should have married. I laughed louder than I needed to. 2 musicians turned toward us. Elise lowered her clipboard. Owen looked down from the booth, tapped his wedding ring twice against the console, and returned to the controls. I believed he was swallowing his jealousy because that was what weak men did. Before leaving, Luca asked whether I still wanted to sing the old song someday. I told him our anniversary might provide the perfect audience. He smiled but did not promise to join me. I counted the reasons he might be careful. 1 marriage, 1 public event, 1 unfinished love story. By the end of rehearsal, several foundation employees knew Luca would perform at our anniversary, and I made no effort to stop them from wondering why. Our 10th anniversary filled the restored theatre with people who knew both of us. Foundation donors occupied the front tables. Owen's mother sat with several relatives near the aisle. Musicians, board members, old friends, and theatre employees filled the room beneath the gold balcony he had spent 2 years helping restore. I had chosen every detail, every. White tablecloths, low candles, a stage covered in warm amber light. The silver microphone stood in the center waiting for the final performance. Owen had handled the sound system, of course. The practical one could make every voice in the building clear, except his own. He wore a dark suit and moved between the tables, checking cables and speaking to the staff. Guests praised him for saving the theatre thousands in technical costs. I watched people shake his hand, as though repairing old speakers made him interesting. Luca arrived shortly before dinner. He kissed my cheek, complimented my dress, and then stepped away to speak with the dark-haired woman I had seen during rehearsals. She wore a black evening dress and remained close to the backstage entrance. I assumed she was Celeste, his manager. One conversation, two private smiles. 3 times Luca checked whether she needed anything. His attention irritated me, but I told myself managers demanded constant access to performers. Once he went on stage, he would remember why I had brought him there. Mara sat beside me and whispered that Luca still looked at me differently. I asked when she had noticed. She said during rehearsal before quickly taking a drink. The answer was less certain than I wanted, but I accepted it. Owen joined us during the first course. He asked whether I was enjoying the evening. I told him I would enjoy it more once the real entertainment began. He glanced toward Luca's table and tapped his wedding ring twice against his water glass. 1 tap, 2. Then his eyes moved toward the sound booth. I smiled because jealousy had finally made him restless. The wine arrived faster than the food. I finished 1 glass during dinner and another during Luca's first song. By the time he began the second, the theatre lights seemed softer and every memory of college felt close enough to touch. Luca stood beneath the amber spotlight with a guitar, singing to a room that had gone completely still. He was older, but the confidence remained. Owen could enter a room without anyone noticing. Luca made people turn before he spoke. That was the difference I had tried to explain for years. After Luca finished, the applause continued until he returned for another bow. I expected him to look directly at me. Instead, he looked towards Celeste near the curtains. She nodded once and he smiled. My fingers tightened around my wine glass. Mara asked whether I was all right. I said Luca was probably checking the schedule with his manager. She did not answer. When the host announced dessert, I saw the silver microphone still standing at the center of the stage. The old song had not been included in Luca's set. He had ignored the one piece that mattered. I decided he needed help remembering. I stood before Mara could stop me and walked toward the stage. A few guests clapped because they assumed I had prepared an anniversary speech. Owen remained seated beside his mother, his. I took the microphone and asked the musicians whether they remembered the melody I had sent earlier. The pianist looked toward the sound booth, then began playing. The first notes moved through the theatre. Familiar, slow, mine. At first, I sang the original words. The song described a woman who had lost the only man capable of making her feel alive. Several guests turned toward Owen and smiled, believing the performance was for him. I let them believe that through the first verse. Then I turned toward Luca. The room changed. Luca lowered his glass but did not stand. I sang the next lines directly to him, replacing several words with memories only he would recognize. The narrow college stage, the summer concert, the night he told me nobody else could understand my voice. I watched his face, waiting for recognition to become action. He stayed in his seat. That hesitation made me more determined. Between verses, I told the guests that anniversaries should celebrate honesty, not comfortable lies. I said some women married the safe man because the man they truly loved had moved on too soon. A nervous laugh came from one of the back tables. Someone lifted a phone to record me. Owen's mother looked down. I continued. The practical one had given me a house, schedules, and years of perfect responsibility. Luca had given me passion. I told everyone that one man had made me feel protected, while the other had made me feel unforgettable. Owen looked at me without moving. His calm made the wine burn hotter inside me. I pointed toward him and said he was not the love of my life. He was the worthless replacement I had accepted after losing the man I should have married. The pianist stopped playing for half a second. I turned sharply, and he resumed. That small interruption made my voice shake, so I raised it. I told Owen he had wasted 10 years believing loyalty could replace desire. I said he was useful, dependable, and empty beside a man like Luca. No one laughed now. The silence felt like attention, and attention had always felt like power. Owen tapped his wedding ring twice against his glass. 1 tap, 2. Then he looked toward the sound booth. The technician moved one hand across the console, but the microphone remained live. Owen could have ended the performance with one signal. He did not. I read his stillness as proof that he had finally accepted the comparison. I faced Luca for the final verse and held out one hand, inviting him to join me. He remained beside his table. Celeste stood near him now, close enough that their shoulders touched. I told myself his refusal came from fear of embarrassing Owen further. That explanation protected the moment, so I kept singing. When the final note ended, scattered applause began near the rear of the room and died almost at once. Mara was no longer smiling. She stared at the tablecloth and folded her napkin into smaller squares. Owen rose slowly but did not approach the stage. He looked at me, then at Luca, and tapped his ring against the glass one final time. I lifted the microphone again and told the guests that at least one man in the room now understood exactly what he had failed to become. The anniversary video reached the foundation office before I did. By Monday morning, 3 employees had already watched it, and 2 donors had sent careful messages asking whether the performance had been planned. I told everyone it was an emotional, artistic moment. Of course, people preferred safe marriages and quiet resentment because honesty made them uncomfortable. Elise avoided my office until lunch. Mara answered my first message with one sentence saying she needed time to think. 1 hour, 2 unanswered calls, 3 empty chairs around my usual lunch table. I blamed Owen. The practical one had sat there looking wounded while allowing everyone to believe I had attacked him without reason. He knew exactly how silence worked. It made other people write the story for him. At home, Owen watched the anniversary recording in the music room. The silver microphone stood beside the desk, its cable wrapped carefully around the base. I found him replaying the moment when I turned toward Luca during the second verse. He did not look angry. That annoyed me more. Anger would have proved that I still mattered. He stopped the video and asked whether I remembered the first song he had ever recorded for me in our apartment. I said memory was not the issue. He told me the song had been the same one I used at our anniversary. He had found the old file on his laptop. Then he played a few seconds. My younger voice filled the room, uncertain but warm. Owen's voice could be heard at the end, saying the recording was beautiful and asking whether I wanted to try again. For a few seconds I remembered the bakery below our apartment and the cheap headphones we shared. Owen had once listened. He had once watched my face while I sang. The practical one had not always been cold. He had only become careful. That thought opened a small space inside me, but I closed it before it could change anything. People became careful when passion disappeared. Luca had never made me ask for excitement. I told Owen the recording proved my point because he had loved my voice more than the woman using it. He looked down at the keyboard. His fingers stayed there without moving. Then he asked whether I had wanted Luca to leave the anniversary with me. The question was quiet, direct. I said I had wanted Owen to understand that another man had once valued what he ignored. He asked whether public humiliation had made me feel valued. I told him the audience had heard only what he had forced me to carry alone. Owen tapped his wedding ring twice against the desk. 1 tap, 2. His eyes moved toward the silver microphone. He said I had begun using Luca's name long before Luca returned to the city. Every forgotten dinner became proof Luca would have remembered. Every quiet weekend became evidence Luca would have taken me somewhere. Owen said he was no longer competing with a real man. He was competing with a memory I had edited for years. I told him that was convenient. Men always called women unrealistic when they could not meet the standard. Owen did not defend himself. He only said the anniversary had shown him that my comparisons were no longer private frustration. They had become something I enjoyed performing. His sadness was plain then. His shoulders lowered, and he touched the old recording file without playing it again. For 1 second, I almost sat beside him. Instead, I said he was trying to become the victim because he had failed as a husband. The next afternoon, Evelyn asked me to meet her inside the theatre lobby. She stood beneath an old poster Owen had restored for the reopening. She did not hug me. She said her son could be impossible to reach. He solved problems instead of comforting people. He hid behind work and expected loyalty to survive without warmth. I waited because I thought she was finally going to admit I had been right. Then she said none of that explained why I had needed donors, relatives, and employees to watch me hurt him. She said I had not sung because I wanted to be heard. I had sung because I wanted Owen to feel small. I told her she would always protect her son. Evelyn said she was not protecting him from the truth. She was protecting the truth from me. That sentence irritated me enough to end the meeting. Later, I found Luca near his dressing room after rehearsal. Celeste stood beside him, reviewing something on a tablet. Owen was there too, speaking with her as though they already knew each other well. Celeste laughed at something he said and touched his arm once before returning to the screen. Luca seemed relaxed around both of them. I asked what they were discussing. Owen said the donor reception required several changes to the sound schedule. Celeste added that Luca's departure time had moved earlier. Her voice was calm and familiar, not formal. Then I noticed the ring on her left hand. A narrow silver band. Luca wore one that looked almost identical during rehearsals. For several seconds, the hallway seemed too quiet. One matching ring. Two people sharing a schedule. 3 times I had seen Luca look toward her before answering me. The shape of the truth came close enough to touch. I asked whether the rings were part of Luca's current image. Celeste looked at Luca before answering. Owen tapped his wedding ring twice against the folder in his hand. 1 tap. 2. Luca said musicians wore many things for personal reasons. It was not a clear answer, but I accepted it because the other explanation would have ruined the story I had already told everyone. I decided Celeste was probably a manager who liked controlling his appearance. That was all. On the drive home, Owen asked whether I understood how far the anniversary performance had gone. I changed my approach. I told him the song had been partly theatrical and that alcohol had made the words harsher than I intended. I said he could still repair the marriage by becoming more romantic and showing me that he was willing to fight for me. Owen asked whether Luca would remain in my life while he completed this test. I said Luca was not the problem. Owen's lack of passion was. He gave me a small, tired smile and tapped his ring twice against the steering wheel. I read that as agreement. At home, he unplugged the silver microphone and placed it inside its case. I told myself he was finally making room for a different kind of marriage. That night, I sent Luca a message saying the donor reception could give us a second chance to finish the song properly. He replied the next morning with 4 words. He said he would be there. I treated that as a promise. The donor reception took place 1 week after our anniversary, inside the same theatre where I had sung to Luca. The foundation board had considered moving the event, but I convinced them that cancelling would make the video look worse. I said the performance had been personal, not professional, and that a successful evening would remind everyone why they trusted me. Of course, several board members avoided my eyes while agreeing. That was how institutions behaved when a woman refused to hide her feelings. They called it concern because fear sounded less respectable. I edited the anniversary recording before arriving at work. The new version began with Luca singing and ended after I called Owen a worthless replacement. I removed the silence afterward and the part where Luca remained seated. Then I posted it with a caption, saying some marriages were built on safety because women had been taught to fear real love. Within an hour, the clip had hundreds of views. 1 comment called me brave, 2 called me cruel. 3 co-workers stopped speaking when I entered the rehearsal hall. I focused on the first comment. Owen found me beside the stage while the technicians tested the lights. The silver microphone was lying on a black cloth near the piano. He asked me to remove the video. His voice was calm, no anger, no public argument. The practical one always expected a quiet request to erase years of neglect. I told him the recording belonged to me because I was the person singing. He said the theatre system had captured the complete event, not the edited story I had posted. I accused him of caring more about how strangers saw him than about how his wife had felt for 10 years. Owen asked whether I understood that donors and foundation employees had been placed inside our marriage without their consent. I said they had witnessed the truth. He tapped his wedding ring twice against the edge of the piano. 1 tap. 2. Then he looked toward the sound booth. I told him something he could not deny. He had made me feel protected, but he had rarely made me feel desired. He had built recording rooms, repaired houses, and solved every practical problem while leaving me alone inside the emotional ones. Owen lowered his eyes. He admitted that he had expected duty to carry feelings he did not know how to express. He said that was his failure. For several seconds, the theatre was quiet except for a technician moving equipment behind the curtain. Then Owen gave me one final choice. He asked me to remove the video, end private contact with Luca, correct what I had told people, and attend counselling with him. He said he was not promising to become Luca. He was offering to speak honestly before there was nothing left worth saying. I looked toward the microphone. The practical one still believed the marriage could continue after everyone had heard who I truly loved. I told him counselling could not turn a replacement into the love of my life. Owen did not repeat the offer. He only said that if I believed every word I had sung, I should perform the complete song that evening, where every person important to my future could hear it without editing. His acceptance surprised me, but it also felt like victory. He had stopped asking me to protect him. At last, he understood that I would not return to silence. I sent Luca a message saying I planned to finish our song during the reception and expected him to join me for the final verse. His reply arrived 23 minutes later. He said he would be present. That was enough. I told the musicians to keep the original arrangement ready. Daniel Brooks, the theatre director, asked whether the board had approved a personal performance. I told him the song was part of the donor program and that I controlled the evening schedule. He did not argue, but he moved the silver microphone onto a separate stand and checked something with the sound technician. I interpreted his caution as professional nervousness. Before the guests entered, I messaged Mara and asked her to sit near the front and record the performance from the best angle. The message showed as read. She did not answer. When I entered the reception hall, her usual seat was empty. I counted the place setting, the untouched glass, and the folded program. Mara had probably decided to arrive late because she disliked board tension. I no longer needed her encouragement anyway. Luca was standing near the side curtain in a dark suit. Celeste remained beside him, holding a folder. Owen waited near the sound booth. The room filled with donors, employees, and board members who had already seen part of my confession online. This time they would hear all of it. Owen tapped his wedding ring twice and looked directly at me. 1 tap. 2. Then he stepped away from the microphone controls. I lifted the silver microphone from its stand, faced Luca, and prepared to make him choose me in front of everyone. I began the first verse with my eyes on Luca. When I reached the line about losing the only man I had ever truly loved, Owen walked from the sound booth and stopped beside the stage. He smiled, tapped his wedding ring twice against the wood, and looked toward Luca. 1 tap. 2. Luca stepped forward, but he did not come alone. Celeste took his hand. The matching rings were no longer stage jewelry or part of his image. Luca introduced her as his wife. My fingers tightened around the silver microphone. He told the room that our relationship had ended 15 years earlier and that he had never asked me to leave Owen. He had answered my messages politely, nothing more. Owen had contacted him after learning that I planned to use our anniversary to declare a love Luca did not share. Luca agreed to attend because Owen wanted the fantasy ended in front of the same people who had heard me present it as truth. Every detail clicked into place. Owen asking for the song title. His knowledge of Luca's schedule. Celeste outside the dressing room. Luca's delayed replies. The 2 taps that always sent someone into position. I tried to say Owen had arranged my humiliation, but Daniel Brooks stepped beside the stage and said Owen had not written my words, edited my video, or placed the microphone in my hand. Nobody argued with him. Luca said I had been important when we were young, but Celeste was the woman he had chosen. Then he left the theatre with her. Mara's chair remained empty. Owen admitted that he had failed me too. He had confused duty with affection and used other people to say what he had been too guarded to say himself. Then he placed the divorce petition on the stage manager's desk, with temporary property arrangements set for review. I moved into a furnished apartment paid for month by month. The foundation placed me on administrative leave. Mara resigned from the anniversary committee and stopped answering my calls. Luca blocked my number before leaving the city with Celeste. The complete theatre recording replaced the edited version I had posted. Owen had made me feel safe without making me feel desired. That remained true. But Luca had never been waiting for me. I had polished an old relationship until it looked brighter than the marriage in front of me, then used a public stage to force two men into roles neither had accepted. The silver microphone remained alone beneath the stage light after everyone left. I called my husband the replacement, but I was the only person Luca had already replaced.